This is a cover of the tourist guide by which the Seoul government introduces where you can find bars, clubs, night markets, etc., but not coffee shops as seen in the background. Urban light is promoted in accordance with festive and hedonistic consumerism. In contrast, my project explores the differential nightlife of the city that never sleeps. I conducted participant observations at 17 cafes from midnight to 5 a.m. to understand how the distinctive but underrepresented nightlife is produced by people who actually inhabit those spaces. I also interviewed 60 cafe users there, asking as to their perceptions of different spaces and time, why they do not or cannot go home at night. Why are they awake at night? Their answer define who they are regarding the three issues they deal with. First, many cafe users said they have a sense of precarity and guilt when they stay home at night. With the higher unemployment rate and expansion of irregular contract jobs, people are pressured to be constantly cultivating themselves to be more marketable. So people are willing to reduce their sleep hours and try to remain productive at night. Second, imagine you live in a 30 square foot studio by yourself, or a bit larger size studio with another person to reside near school or work in the city. Otherwise, you have to commute over 3 hours every day since you can't afford to pay the high rent. Poor dwelling conditions can also leave you vulnerable to nighttime crime, as was the case for one woman that I interviewed. Last, social isolation is apparent in South Korea, known for the longer working hours and highest number of suicide cases. For those who are always expected to work harder and longer hours, cafe going is considered as the most feasible, minimal, and efficient social activity at night that brings a sense of belonging even if they spend solitude time in cafes. In short, nightlife at cafe is produced by the sleepless whose consumption is inseparable from socio-economic problems of South Korean society. I hope my research inspires you to reconsider the binary conception of day and night, private and public, and consumption and production of the space, and to think about how and why nightlife in your city is different from that of Seoul. I end here then. Thank you for listening.
My name is Kristen Witt, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Kentucky. And by the end of this presentation, I hope to leave you an advocate for science education. I bet you didn't know, science tends to be nearly absent from elementary schools across the United States. In fact, in 2018, only 17% of kindergarten through third grade students and 35% of fourth through sixth grade students receive science instruction on all or most days of the school year. That means 65 to 80% of elementary students are not receiving science on a daily basis. Let that sink in. Now, imagine this. You're a teacher at an elementary school and your boss, media, and peers tell you that your job relies on students' math and reading test scores. What do you teach? The obvious answer for most is math and reading. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of all other subjects. Science being my main concern today. This story starts 4.5 years ago when I moved to a STEM lab position at my school. This sounds like a good move and it's what many other schools have in place, but what it really does is make STEM a special area class, like gym, art, music, and science. What this did at my school is put all the responsibility for teaching science on me. Teachers felt like I had science covered and they could continue teaching math and reading. I taught in that role for 3 years, and along the way, I questioned the model every single day. One day, I decided to do the math. If I see students an hour a week, this means our students get less than 30 hours of science instruction a year. To put that into perspective, reading is taught 2 hours a day. That's roughly 350 hours a year for reading instruction. Then, after several years of not being tested, in 2017, the state test scores came out. Elementary students in the state scored a 31%. My district, 30%. My elementary school, 14%. The funny thing is, people were shocked about these scores. How do you expect to score well in an area that's not taught? Luckily, those scores created a sense of urgency towards science education within the district. They soon adopted the Amplify Science curriculum to be used daily by their elementary classroom teachers starting in the 2019-2020 school year. As this was happening, I began researching the STEM specialist topic and realized it would be my dissertation. I conducted multiple literature reviews and ultimately decided to go to my principal and pitch the STEM specialist co-teaching model. He listened to me, helped me work out the details, and accepted my proposal for the role. What this means is, rather than me teaching science to all kids, I supported and guided teachers to use the Amplify curriculum and teach science in their own classrooms every day. I planned with teachers, co-taught with them, and helped in whatever way they needed. What I found was that the addition of a STEM specialist co-teaching model did positively impact science instruction in the elementary classroom and made strides towards daily science teaching and learning. By the end of the school year, teachers, administrators, and students saw value in science education, teachers' confidence grew, and it truly felt like science became a shared responsibility and a weight was lifted off my shoulders and shared with everyone in the building. Science instruction is needed at the elementary level. If a STEM specialist can help make this happen, more research needs to be conducted to prove this and make it happen for students in the future. Now, who's with me?
Hello everyone. I'm opening the presentation by discussing about human body and the diseases which can occur in the human body. Human body is the best constructed machinery ever devised. In that, our brain works like a sophisticated computer storing a lot of information. Spinal cord, a long tubular structure which is connected to the brain, it constitutes the central nervous system. It coordinates various movements like walking, moving shoulders, arms, etc. Any dysfunction in the brain or the spinal cord leads to some pathological responses, which are very, very pathetic. Like spinal cord injury, it leads to paralyzed body part. And also some abnormal activities of the proteins in the brain leads to a disease called Alzheimer's, where patients have complete memory loss. In order to perform any function or misfunction within the human cells, we need to understand the very important concept of the transport system. Every day, various nutrients, biomolecules, they will be exchanged within the cells. But sometimes particles like bacteria, viruses, or toxic particles enters, causing toxicity of the cells, leading to the disease. In order to resolve this toxicity, let's understand what could be done by considering a simple analogy. In a big ocean, say we have a small house where a dragon entered inside, causing destruction. What could be done here? We can send a Superman where he can interact with the dragon, enter the house, and kill the dragon. In the example discussed, human body is like a big ocean and water house is the cell. The dragon is the problem existing within the cell. So we need to really design the nanoparticles which acts like a superhero. In our lab, we model different polymers of the cell and we use different nanoparticles to identify what is the criteria needed for the best interaction with the cell. In doing so, we can figure out novel therapeutics which can be helpful for the treatment of Alzheimer's and spinal cord injuries. So the conclusion here is our efforts are trying to make life beautiful for everyone to live. Goal is we no longer wanted to see a paralyzed patient on a wheelchair or stop seeing any memory loss patients who will forget about their own families. Thank you so much. And I'm Kanti Moti and I'm from chemistry department in UK. Thank you.
I want you to think about the last time you were in a forest after a recent rain. You take in a deep breath, and you smell that deep, earthy smell of the soil. That is geosmin, a microbially produced gas. If you decided to hike through that forest, maybe you ended up at the top of a mountain in the Blue Ridge of Appalachia. As you gazed at that beautiful cerulean haze blanketing the mountaintops, you were seeing isoprene, a plant-produced gas. Every minute of every day, dozens of these gases are released into the environment during the decomposition of plant material. I study how these gases can be used to keep soil healthy in order to increase agricultural production. We're going to need to produce twice as much food by 2050 in order to keep up with our growing population. Healthy soils are rich in organic matter. You might say that organic matter is what plants crave. It serves as the pantry for crops, providing a stockpile of water and nutrients for when the plants need them. Therefore, building soil organic matter is key to meeting increased demand for food. So if we want to grow more food to feed more people, we have to make sure that our plants have all the water and nutrients they need. We can do this by building a bigger pantry. So simply put, if we can increase organic matter, then the crops have a bigger pantry to feed them throughout the growing season. However, we don't have a great understanding of how to increase organic matter in the soil. So I started out with a pretty simple question. Can those gases that we smell and see in forests be used as the building blocks for expanding the amount of organic matter in soils? But there's a catch. There's always a catch. You can't just pick up a handful of soil and tell where all the gases went. If you were building a pantry in your home, you could track where each board goes by labeling them. I figured I could do the same thing, but instead of using a Sharpie, I labeled the gases using a heavy version of carbon that isn't very common in nature. This allowed me to simply measure the mass of the carbon in the different parts of the soil, and if that carbon was heavy, I knew the gases had been there. I found that these gases that are released when leaves are decomposing enter the soil where native bacteria and fungi gobble them up. When those bacteria and fungi die, they release their cellular contents into the soil, increasing organic matter, thus making the pantry bigger. This study was the first time anyone showed that plant-derived carbon could enter below-ground ecosystems without direct contact with the soil, and it established that these gases not only enrich our experiences in nature by providing us with comforting smells and beautiful sights, but that with proper management, these gases can be used to build a bigger pantry for our crops, allowing us to grow more food and helping us feed the growing population.
Hi, I'm Al-Fadl Al-Khalid. I'm from Department of Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering. Today, I'll talk about the classification of codling moth-infested apples. Apple is one of the most important fruits in the world, and the United States is considered the largest exporter of the apples. The main countries that import US apple have zero tolerance for any form of pest infestation. And nowadays, in Kentucky states, the codling moth is a serious insect pest in apples. When not controlled, codling moth can cause 100% infestation of an apple orchard. Despite pesticide control and other mitigation efforts, codling moth remain a huge problem in the apple industry in the United States and other countries. And for this, we applied fusion sensor approach. In this approach, it's including two methods, acoustic emission and hyperspectral imaging. In the acoustic emission is used to detect the vibration or the sound generated from the larvae as a result of different activities such as movement or eating or chewing. And these vibrations are detected by applying special sensors and some other electronic circuits to detect the low and the high frequency, which is beyond the human level. While for the hyperspectral imaging, it's taking the image of the apple so that it can be used to detect the chemical and the physical changes. So the data taken from these two approaches will be analyzed using some machine learning models to improve the classification rates and enhance the technique's performance. As the potential outcome of this technique, it can be used to reduce the food loss, which is the main problem nowadays, as well as it can be used to improve the technique of codling moth-infested apple detection from the manual and random approach to an objective method. This work is creative and innovative because it will lead to the development of a non-destructive method. Also, this work will help the United States multi-billion-dollar Apple industry remain sustainable and globally competitive. Thank you so much for your listening.
I want you to think about a struggle or a hardship that you've experienced while being in graduate school. Perhaps this is your first semester in your program and you're trying to navigate the world of academia in the midst of a pandemic, utilizing distance learning options for the first time, such as Zoom or Canvas. Maybe you're at the dissertation stage and you're feeling that disconnect from your cohort. Whatever the issue is, I want you to think of it, have it at the forefront of your mind, and I'm going to say one thing to you. Get over it. You're a graduate student. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Obtain some grit and persevere. It's graduate school after all. You know, graduate school's not for everyone. Now, I think we've all heard that sort of sentiment at some point. Either we've internalized it or we've actually had it expressed to us. And more often than not, it's graduate faculty, sometimes administrators, or if you're lucky enough to have them, support staff in your college, who kind of maintain that mindset. But nothing can be further from the truth. Graduate students also need to have access to student support services, the same as undergraduate students, in order to be successful in their programs. Now, how do we define student success? It can be defined in a multitude of ways, but I define it in a continuing way and also in kind of a finalized way. The continuing is that retention, signing up for your classes every semester, maintaining your 3.0 GPA so that you stay in good standing with a graduate school, things of that nature. Whereas that kind of final student success is graduation, is successfully defending your dissertation, is getting that degree conferred. Now, undergraduate students have so many support systems available to them through academic advising, through degree audits that pull accurately. And yet, graduate students don't often have access to those same resources. They're very rarely professional graduate advisors in their programs. And more often than not, the type of audits that are utilized for undergraduate students don't work for graduate students. There's much more of a dependence upon graduate faculty to help mentor students throughout their program. And sometimes faculty just aren't equipped to help students navigate the basics of higher education. For example, applying for your degree, or making sure that you sign up for the appropriate classes. That's why it's so important that we, one, find out exactly what it is our students need to be successful, and then implement it. Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, brace yourselves. I'm going to say a dirty word, masturbation. Now I'm going to say an even dirtier phrase, female masturbation. Now that I've gotten your attention and the shock factor has worn off, let me tell you what I've learned about female masturbation so far. According to Castle and Allen, 2011, when masturbation is studied, men tend to be the ones that are focused on. Further, Hargon's 2017 pointed out that more privileged identities are generally studied in sexuality research. Now, why does this matter, you ask? Well, those who are studied are in the spotlight, so when women and more marginalized people are not studied, all the juicy information they have to give is lost, and this research suffers. Another issue is that sex-positive stances are not always taken when studying sex or masturbation. This leaves people feeling ashamed and guilty for natural and healthy sexual behaviors. In 2006, the World Health Organization implored therapists and other mental health professionals to take a more sex-positive stance in order to help their clients. With this in mind, we wanted to find out just how sex-positive and inclusive the literature on female masturbation is. To do this, my colleagues and I did a content analysis, or as I like to call it, a cliterature review, of 85 articles from 2000 to 2020 that studied female masturbation. The team then coded the articles as sex positive, sex neutral, and sex negative. We also wanted to see how inclusive the samples were, so we quantified the demographics by seeing how many marginalized identities out of race, gender expression, sexuality, ability status, and age were present in the studies. So what did we find? We found that the literature is overwhelmingly sex positive, with 67% of the articles taking that stance. We also found that from 2000 to 2020, there was an increase in sex positivity from 50% to 72%. Now, for demographics, we did not find such positive results. To start, almost half of the studies did not even report the demographics of their samples. Further, only 5% of the studies had at least 3 marginalized identity groups highlighted, while 0% had 4 or 5. Only about 7% had 2 groups highlighted, and 16% had only 1 marginalized group highlighted. These results show us that we have a long way to go in terms of sex positivity within the literature, but more importantly, there's a huge gap in the demographics of the literature. The literature is effectively silencing the voices and experiences of more marginalized women. And the photo that you see encapsulates sex positivity and inclusivity and serves as a visual for what the literature should aspire towards. This will break the stigma for all women that it is normal and healthy to masturbate and enjoy your body. Thank you.
I can't breathe. Hands up, don't shoot. Say her name. Phrases we hear all too often. And what about the boring issue? Why not the option to indict the others? Now he wants to silence them? You know, Daniel Cameron, Kentucky Attorney General. Hello, my name is Christina Walker. I'm a licensed attorney pursuing my PhD in communication at the University of Kentucky. My research intersects pertinent issues of law, communication, and culture, like this study, which largely explores how laws are written and communicated in ways that adversely impact minority and underrepresented populations. Gatekeeping theory states, to maintain societal control, certain persons and institutions of power decide what information to disclose and withhold. Prosecutors have wide discretion regarding information presented to grand juries during indictment. Indictment is early on, when charges are either upheld or not. Grand juries can subpoena witnesses and try to collect evidence independently. Still, prosecutors have overwhelming, unchecked control to include how information flows, like how a case is presented and how law is explained. Research shows cases of police brutality often go unpunished or are presented unthoroughly and unconvincingly, thereby juries decline to indict. Accordingly, in this study, I propose participants act as grand jurors in a fictional police brutality case. We manipulate case severity, or whether the case resulted in injury or death. We also manipulate information flow, whether information is presented compellingly or not, and whether it's detailed or not. Finally, we manipulate severity of criminal charges with 3 levels of severity or types of charges. In short, we seek to answer research questions surrounding whether the detail and manner in which information is presented influence decision to indict or acquit, and whether these variables influence the decision to indict on more serious charges. I hypothesize presenting more detailed information compellingly will increase willingness to indict and do so on more serious charges. This would say a lot about the need for legislative reform surrounding prosecutorial discretion. We are demanding a just process resulting in the opportunity for a trial beyond indictment. Chances significantly decrease when prosecutors have wide discretion that might result in gatekeeping.
In US, almost 76% of the total roadways are road-to-lane highways. In the top left picture, we can see an example of road-to-lane highway. Safety on these roadways has been a major concern. Statistically, 66% of the total fatalities and 47% of the total injuries has been reported on these roadways. So now the question arises, what can be possibly the reasons for the crashes on these roads? One can be, as we can see in the top right picture here, that when there is a large amount of traffic, the chances of crashes on this road increases. Other factors can be when the lane width is narrow. Here in this picture in the bottom right, that due to the narrow roadways, the chances of crashes increases. And also if the pavement is wet and the condition is nighttime, then there can be more crashes. And on top of these, vehicles are also involved in the crashes of this road. We shouldn't forget about that. Because before an accident, the vehicle must be operating at a speed. Just think like this: when you are driving a car at a higher speed and suddenly you have to respond to some kind of hazard within a short time period. And if your response is not quicker in reducing your speed or just do the brake, then unfortunately there can be a crash. And the result can be different based on how higher your speed was. So the crash can be severe if you hit the car at a high speed, just like the figure in the middle of the slide. And also the crash can be severe, just like the bottom left figure, when your speed was too high. Then there can be fatalities like this. So now the question is the speed is responsible for a crash or not? And my dissertation class to answer this question. For this, I had to collect crash data from police report. And for the speed data set, now that we have advanced technologies like GPS, speed data has been abandoned. So taking the advantage of real speed data set coming out of these GPS based vehicles, I could model the crashes of rural two-lane highways using speed as one of the factors. And from the results, I found that speed does influence the crash of these roads. That is, speed is one of the reasons for crash, and how severe the crash is on this kind of roads. That's all about my presentation. Thanks for listening.